Well, Charles, first of all, thank you for receiving us here, Rubber Chicken Games.
It's a pleasure.
It's a huge honor for us because, as you can see by our name, we are 30 and 30-something people who grew up with adventure games, and that's why the Rubber Chicken in homage to another adventure game series. And personally, you were one of my idols, so it was
how
great
kind of you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Broken Sword made me, as I told you, one of the most addicted adventure game players because of the intro of first Broken Sword.
That's how interesting. That was really the coming together of the most wonderful layout artist, and that layout artist was a gentleman called Owen Cahill, who sadly died 2 years ago. But when I'd finished Beneath the Steel Sky, we wanted to move from pixel art because the ST was 320 by 200, and we went from 320 to 200 to a whopping 640 480, and from 16 colors to 256 colors, and we needed to move from pixel art to something that felt more artistic. And I had one of my pixel artists do some of the backgrounds, and they looked all right. And I was in Dublin, in Ireland, and talking to some students, and one of the lecturers, Owen Cahill, looked at it and said, "You really ought to be working with a cartoon layout artist." And I went, yeah. He said, "Show me what," and he showed me his work, and it was utterly brilliant. It was mesmerizing. And that opening, actually, if you look at it as a whole thing, you can see that the way the camera, I mean, I should show you later, or if you wanted to put it, show it, because the camera actually, you remember the gargoyle where it starts?
Yeah.
The gargoyle on the actual is an image, is an angle. So what you have to do is that you can see that the camera moves. So the camera originally moves like that, swings round, and it swings like that, and it creates an incredibly dynamic sense. And that was part of.
It was a capture. In fact, it wasn't animated, or was it?
Oh well, there was a little animation of a bird,
Okay.
but it was the genius of Owen's movement. Of course, Barrington Phelan's music, and Rolf Saxon and his voiceover, and the three of them just came together really nicely for that particular sequence. I'm very proud of it. It worked well.
I don't know how it worked in the rest of Europe, but I remember in Portugal we had a video games TV show. It died a few years ago, of course. But when Broken Sword 1, Shadows of Tampa, was released, I remember they opened the TV show with the intro for Broken Sword.
Oh wow!
I remember every single one was like, "Whoa, this is an animated movie," because that was the closest to. Okay, we can remember from Don Bluth, Dragon's Lair, and stuff.
Yeah.
But with that quality, Broken Sword was the first thing, and I think it was what captured most of the Portuguese gamers.
That's really interesting. I'll tell you a funny story. My uncle is Portuguese. He was, sadly, he died recently. And he's kind of integrated into Broken Sword in two ways. The first one is that his surname is de Vasconcelos. And they were all watching Portuguese television, and I was interviewed. And I was talking about the characters, and I was talking about the de Vasconcelos, and they had no idea that I'd stolen their name for one of the characters in the game.
Okay.
But also, my uncle was a communist, and during a communist.
A communist. Okay.
So during the terrible days, who was the Portuguese? Salazar, yeah. During the terrible.
The one that J.K. Rowling used for the villain of Harry Potter.
Did she?
Yeah, Salazar Slytherin.
Oh.
Because he was a teacher in Portugal.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
So my uncle had to escape from Portugal, and he lived in Paris. And I remember going to Paris to stay with him, and I hate to say this, but it might even have been late 60s, but it was probably the very early 70s. I just went with my mother, and it was the most amazing time because Paris was so exotic. Now, England now is a great, and London is a great city, okay?
I think it's the cultural metropolis of Europe, actually.
Well, I mean, I'm very proud of what London's achieved. But in the 70s, it was a shitty, dark, grim place. There was an awful lot of social unrest. We were not happy.
music reflected that.
And the music and punk, wonderful punk reflected that, absolutely.
Actually, everything that the English people created culturally, because of the social tension, the rest of Europe felt that.
Yeah.
The post-punk and even the gothic and all that bubbling pot that was.
And there was a lot of anger.
Raging.
But so, and the other thing about in England is you drank water out of a tap, but we really laughed at the idea of anybody drinking bottled water. I mean, why? Well, we drank milk because milk was good for you, and so we drink 2 or 3 pints of milk a day, and there were no restaurants, and the food. I mean, my mother was a very good cook, but generally the food was very bland. So going to France, and the food was so amazing. People walked with such elegance, and the clothes that they wore, and the smell of Gitan and Gauloise rather than in Benson and Hedges, and it was amazing. And in many ways, that sense of amazing wonder of Paris has kind of driven what an Englishman's view of Paris as a place that's amazing and a sense of wonder and amazing characters.
That's what happens with George, man. He's a sort of he doesn't belong there, but you try to reflect the vision of a British man on Paris.
Exactly, yes. And he's American, so he's they were once British, before they lost their way.
Well, something cool about the first Broken Sword and the rest of the series, because off the record, this is not recording. You were talking about Templars before it was cool.
Yeah.
And
is this not? This isn't recording.
No, this isn't. Let me check. I'll check.
Oh, no, you're welcome to. I don't mind if it does record.
No, it isn't recording at all.
Right. No. I don't mind saying it. I'll say it on the record.
Yeah.
I'll say, very much on the record. The Da Vinci Code is very much our nemesis. And I actually am really fond of the Da Vinci Code. And I'd love to meet Dan Brown one day. Our fans are absolutely convinced that Dan Brown must have played Broken Sword. Because, the premise of the Da Vinci Code is an American comes to Paris, meets a French young sassy woman. They get drawn together by a Templar conspiracy that resonates into the modern day and get hunted.
I don't know, how old is Dan Brown? Can you imagine? 40 something?
Probably, I don't know.
He must have played Broken Sword.
Yes.
It's normal that he's there.
Well, it's yeah. So, but anyway, I mean, I don't care in the least, and what I'd be so pleased if he turned around and said he had. I mean, that would be great, and I would welcome him, and I would feel very flattered. But we certainly, if I go back to 1993, Broken Sword was conceived over a bottle of very fine French wine in a restaurant in the King's Road in Chelsea in London. Okay, and the reason I remember this is because I've just given a talk at GDC Europe about Broken Sword as a post-mortem. So all of these memories came flooding back. But we were sitting with a really very talented games marketing, sales, now director, Sean Brennan, who's also a very good friend. And I pitched him, because I love the idea of hieroglyphs in some sort of Egyptian game. And I will do it one day, unless somebody steals my idea.
You hear that?
You heard it here first. Yeah, Dan. And if it's in Dan Bloody Brown, then I'll come after him.
Okay.
But Sean said, no, Egyptians games don't sell. That was it. That was the end of the discussion. But he just read Foucault's Pendulum, and Foucault's Pendulum talks about the Knights Templar. Brilliant book, very, very good book. And we started talking about the Knights Templar, and it was Sean's idea to use them in some way. And at that time, almost nobody had heard of them. You had this lunatic book, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, with this crazy, crazy idea of that's where the idea of the Priory of Sion comes. When Dan Brown says fact, there is an organisation called the Priory of Sion, he's quoting directly from The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. It is utter nonsense, utter nonsense. It was founded by a fellow called Pierre Plantard, who claimed to be the last Grand Master. And he was a French anti-Semite, a nasty piece of work, who was the Grand Master of multiple secret societies. And, I mean, he was just a crook. So that's kind of sort of an interesting group. So, whether Dan Brown did or didn't play Broken Sword, he certainly, we'd laid a lot of the groundwork for the Templars going into the mass consciousness, the zeitgeist. of the public. Because they're such a wonderful story. And the real shame is that then it became horribly cliched. Because dozens of books, dozens of terrible films. I mean, National Treasure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to be rude about Dan Brown, but National Treasure was a dreadful, dreadful film.
Actually, on your research, you of course crossed with some ideas, some legends, some myths that connect the Templars to Portugal. Really intricate, because there are some legends that say that the Holy Grail is still buried in one of our monasteries.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Which one?
I think it's Tomada. We have lots of Templar icons in Portugal because of the Crusades.
Yeah.
This is all legends, so some people say it's buried here or buried there, but some myths connect Portugal with the Templars because of the actual history.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, very much so.
The Crusades. Don't forget, we are a country that was built on the trying to expel the Muslims from the Iberia, because Spain. There were two.
Was Portugal part of Spain in those days?
No. It was a county. The north was a county, north of the country, and the south was conquered by Muslims.
Yeah.
That's why if you visit south of Portugal, you can notice some Muslim traces. You can still notice in the architecture.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And Toledo was part. That was on. Toledo was very much part of that, wasn't it?
Yeah, you can also connect that part with southern Portugal. And you still see Portugal is created that way. So from north to south, the Crusaders went to expelling Muslims, and that's why you notice such a strong Templar icons in Portugal in some of our architecture.
Oh, interesting.
Some of our Romanic architecture, and it's one of the things that probably Portuguese gamers were also driven into Broken Sword, because the story was the story was well written. I probably have to say this because I'm talking with the actual creator, but I think it's one of the causes that made us so driven to Broken Sword and the rest of the series. So one thing we were really happy was with the Kickstarter for Broken Sword 5, because I would like to ask you, and I think I already know the answer, but adventure games is a genre which was dead for a long time. Don't you think so?
Yeah. Adventure games are a niche. They're not mainstream. We've all of us have tried, whether it be Telltale, whether it be Daedalic in Germany, we've always tried to change, to make adventures, move them back into the main. Certainly Broken Sword 3 and 4, during that time there was a sense that if we could bring adventures up to date, then they could go back into the mainstream.
With the 3D.
But with 3D. But actually I think actually that was mistaken. I think that adventures have a hardcore audience, and they are very passionate, but they are a niche. Let's say that 10%, I'm picking a number out of, but let's say 10% of people of the market would play adventure games. And we should be very pleased that we have 10% of a massive market. But even Telltale are finding it hard to break beyond that with their very high production values.
Conquering new players.
Yeah.
Do you think adventure games is a generational genre?
What do you mean by that?
For example, there is a specific age of gamers. For example, 30 plus, 40 years old.
We're not finding that at all.
It's less appealing to new gamers. No.
Our hardest hardcore Kickstarter fans are generally in their 20s and early 30s.
Okay.
Our most passionate are probably the people that played Broken Sword when they were 11, 12, 13. So they're now in their early 30s. Yeah. How old are you now?
I'm 29.
29, yeah. So they are the people that reminisce, because one of the interesting things is that when we wrote Broken Sword, we had no way of communicating directly with our audience. We'd connect to the publisher would connect to the retailer would connect to the gamer. So if the gamer wanted to talk about a game, they kind of could talk to the retailer, but the retailer didn't care. They could talk to the publisher, and frankly the publisher didn't care. And we had no interaction whatsoever. The most amazing thing was with Kickstarter is on many levels. I mean, obviously the money was very valuable and that was great. but the ability to communicate directly with 15,000 people was absolutely extraordinary. And we got some wonderful, wonderful emails from people who, when they were young, had played the game and been very loyal Broken Sword fans since then. There was two that particularly moved me, can I tell you them?
Yeah.
The first one was from a young man who talked about his memories of his grandmother, who he had a very, very close relationship with. And she's dead now. But he said that what really encapsulates the warm relationship was she took him to a video game shop for his birthday and said, you can have any game as long as I approve. So of course he bought Broken Sword. And they played it together. And whenever he would get home from school and he would run back from school to get to her, to play the game and to be with her, and they would solve the puzzles together. And to him, the warm relationship with his grandmother was encapsulated and very much facilitated by this video game. Another person wrote a really sad letter. He worshipped his older brother, and they used to play Broken Sword at school. They were at school together. They would quote lines from each other and laugh because they loved the jokes. And then the brother died, drowned, when he was very young. So, this is now 15 years later, and this young man wrote to say that Broken Sword is really important because of the memories that it has in connecting him to his brother. And this is kind of unique to the interactive medium. You wouldn't have stories like that. Of course you go to your girlfriend and you snuggle up and you watch a film and you remember the film you're watching. But there isn't that intensity of interaction with other people. And as a medium, as an entertainment medium, I think we should be very proud of what games can do. Of course, there are lots of very visceral games that are, that scare people and quite negative. And there are some games that, frankly, are very, very, very negative indeed. And I wish they'd never been made. But as a medium, 99% of these games are extraordinary, and they are an amazing new art form. And I think we should celebrate that.
It's actually strange and fun to see a genre so single-player centered, and you have stories of people who have strong connections with other people by playing.
Always. I would say most people play with somebody else. Very, very large number.
Only the second one I played with my older cousin, who was a huge Broken Sword fan. When he bought the second one, we have a 10-year gap between us, and I went to play all the game with him. And it's sometimes when I told you, I'm gonna interview Charles Cecil, I was like, oh my god. Yeah,
I should have brought some comics. And I could have given him a comic.
Oh.
I'm so sorry. That was really stupid of me.
You can say that to a comic collector.
Yeah. I'll send him one later.
Okay. I'll give you my comics. Well, so you think adventure games are still appealing to younger players who are used to? It looks like multiplayer is conquering the market.
Yeah. The reason that I say it's a niche is because the gameplay is slow.
Yeah.
The gameplay can be frustrating.
You play at your pace.
And you play at your own pace, and you don't get instant gratification. And that's not a criticism of how people play games at all. But one of the things that I remember somebody saying to me was they loved playing adventure games, and they'd go to sleep wondering what the solution was, and in the morning they'd wake up and they'd try it, and they had this incredible sense of achievement.
Yeah.
Now, that was 20 years ago, and that was a very different era. And we don't write adventures like that anymore anyway. But
like the goat puzzle?
Like the goat puzzle. The goat puzzle was very naive. The reason the goat puzzle is the way that it was is because there were two groups of people. There were people that played adventure games, and really understood the grammar, and would rush through these games and finish them quickly and complain that they were too short and too easy. And then you had normal people
who enjoyed the narrative.
Who enjoyed the narrative and enjoyed the game and enjoyed the challenge, and found the puzzles quite difficult. And what I wanted to do was try and bridge the gap, and it was very naive. So I put in a
timed puzzle
with a really difficult puzzle that kind of broke the rules. Yeah. So it stopped everybody, but it particularly stopped the mainstream.
So, just to wrap it up, how was the experience of working for Beneath the Steel Sky with one of the greatest comic book artists?
Dave Gibbons is a really nice guy.
Yeah.
He was particularly famous in 1994, 95,
Yeah, because
when
of the 80s,
because of,
late 80s.
and Watchmen is enormously well regarded,
Yeah.
but it was kind of at its peak. And he would get onto a train and come to Hull, and we had a grotty little office above an arcade. But the one thing about that arcade is it did very good. Do you know a bacon butty?
No, what is it?
It's a bacon sandwich.
No.
In English, it's called a bacon butty.
No, I don't know what it is actually.
Well, it's just a bacon sandwich.
Okay.
Just a bacon sandwich.
Just has a fancy name.
It's a kind of working class bacon butty.
Okay.
And he threw everything into it, and he contributed. He drew the characters, of course.
Yeah.
He drew the backgrounds, and we worked really closely on the story. And it was a real pleasure working with him. And he then helped us out on Broken Sword 1, drawing the little characters. And I very much hope I'll have the opportunity to work with him again. But he's a friend, and we keep in touch.
So, the question, Beneath the Steel Sky 2.
Maybe I'm not talking to him about it, and it would require. I mean, we couldn't do Beneath the Steel Sky 2 without him.
Yeah.
I mean, it just wouldn't work, and he'd be an integral part. And I guess we wait until the time is right for both Revolution and him. I would love to. I'm very flattered by the affection that there is for Beneath the Steel Sky. I mean, a lot of it was written by a fellow called Dave Cummins, who was our writer at Revolution at the time.
Yeah. He worked for Broken Sword 1?
He did.
He did, yes.
And half of Broken Sword 2. He actually came with me from Activision. I was the head of development at Activision. And I remember him writing test reports for adventure games. And his test reports were so much better written than the adventure games. It was really, really funny. Because he'd basically try and correct. He was a very, very bright and a great writer. And he was a very important part. Sadly, he's died as well. I mean, there's a kind of common theme here, but I guess it was a long time ago, and people get older.
Yeah. So just to finish, do you think there's a space for mobile for adventure games? I know you just did Broken Sword, the director's cut. Do you think it's a good platform to try to conquer new players, the mobile market?
Broken Sword is very popular, and you were talking about whether it's a generational thing. It kind of can't be, because we've had huge success on particularly iPad, but iOS generally, and Android, and that is to a market that didn't play games before. A lot of them. So I'm of the belief, just to repeat myself, that of the people in this world, there is a percentage, which I say 10%, but it could be more, it could be less, who would love adventure games if they knew about them. The problem is, when you do your marketing,
it's not mainstream
it's going to go out to 90% who won't.
Like Candy Crush and stuff.
And so, actually, one of the reasons that, the games industry is a great place, because we all like each other, developers like each other, we cooperate with each other. We've just done a deal with Daedalic where we promote games to each other. It's a win-win. And I don't know them well, but the Telltale guys are great. It's lovely, and part of the reason is because we like each other. But there's also every reason to be friends with them, because we've got nothing to lose. Because if somebody buys an adventure game, then they're going to buy other adventure games. So we have everything to gain by working together.
But for that, I think Telltale might be opening some new doors.
Yes, very much so. Telltale are awesome.
I know lots of people who have never played adventure games. They try them and they eventually ask me, do you know any other adventure games? I said, yeah, go to the classics. Just last question. Do you think a small percentage of the Broken Sword sales, even in PC or mobile, might be people that bought the first one and wanted the director's cut? Because I did that. Lots of my friends, we have 2 copies because, we have to play the director's cut.
Yeah, no, as I said, the hardest hardcore are people who played it first time round, and are delighted at the idea. I mean, one person who became a producer, who was a Broken Sword fan, said that when she watched the Kickstarter video, I mean, she wasn't working for us then, you know, she heard the music, which was reminiscent. She saw George and Nico, and she got goosebumps because she knew it was coming back. And that was kind of what we were trying to achieve in our Kickstarter video.
And it was, personally, I think you were really, really well to return to 2D. Yeah, and the animation is amazing. So,
well, what we need to do is next time try and, I mean, 3D is a lot more flexible. So what we really need to do is try and make it look like 2D in 3D. That would be the ideal scenario.
Yeah, maybe.
Because they were 3D characters, pre-rendered.
Yeah. We know.
So
it looked like sprite animation, but with the quality of 3D modeling. Yeah. Okay, Charles, really thank you for getting us. It's a pleasure.